Hello, boy, it's 4:30 on the dot. I slid right in here in time. So I'll get everybody a moment to kind of filter in. Um, but suffice it to say, today we're going to be going over developing and refining the college list. This is the first time that I've done this presentation. Um, the essay presentation as that we'll do next week, as I've mentioned before, I've done the essay presentation since 2002. But this is the first time I've done it. Um, so, it'll be fun to be along for the ride. I'm sure there'll be a bunch of things that I've omitted. But the reason that I'm doing this is, there are a lot of good resources that are out there on the essays. There are the trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, how to work your way through the essays. Very, very straightforward. With developing the college list, there aren't nearly as many resources out there, and it's something that is at least as far as at this point, as far as things are concerned, that's one of the few remaining pieces of control that or aspects of the application process that the student has control over, and it's super important, especially right around this time next year, for all of you 11th graders to have to be feeling good about yourselves, because right now people are deciding from among a variety of schools, and it's the more you have to decide from, a lot of the times the happier a camper you are. So the college list is, again, at this point in most students' high school careers, the one thing that they've got more control over than anything else that is going to dictate level of happiness a year from now. um Also, which something that we'll go over. Oh, okay, I'll just jump into the presentation. Everybody can kind of catch up. Thank you for everybody that's just joining us. Just let me go over the agenda for today. We're going to be going over the process that I typically use to go over the and develop the college list for students, to shed some light on things, and to hopefully allow you to make some informed decisions on where you want to ultimately cut down the list for. Um, we go over measuring selectivity, how we'll determine what schools are what levels of selectivity, and how we should build a balanced list based on that. Um, a huge component of the application review, particularly for engineering students, for computer science students, is the consideration of the major. So we go into that, quite a bit today as well. And we go into other considerations, everything from, a little bit on safety, a little bit on cost of attendance, and then a little bit of housekeeping. But to get started off with sort of, just kind of a little bit of background on everything. So there are 2,800 four-year colleges in the United States. There's another 1,200 two-year colleges, short vote tech things, community colleges, and and so forth. But 2,800, accredited four-year degree granting undergraduate institutions. Oh, we're focusing on like 100 of them, and not even like all 100 of them. Most of like the top 100, 125 in the U.S. News and World Report college rankings. That's kind of the touchstone for all of this. Not that U.S. News gives anything that's like that's that reflects reality. It does kind of, but because that's the best collection for understanding schools and how they compare to one another, particularly in terms of selectivity. Um, we'll review the results from this past year at our next presentation, which I'm going to do, or no, the one after this, the one in May. I think I'm going to do the results at. They were actually very, very good, as I've spoken with some of you at. Surprisingly good at computer science, which last year was just an a nuclear disaster. This year, very, very good, especially for in particular for CS. We're not going to be speaking a lot about early action or early decision today, because I do that in the results presentation. It just makes more sense, when going over the results, to disaggregate them for ED, EA, RD. I go over it a little bit today, but just to kind of give you a set the stage for all of this. So moving into the process, my process for selecting the schools that I ultimately present you with. It's much more than just throwing names up in the air and seeing where they land. The And this is something that I think that, it's not like everything that I do, it's not rocket science. The first thing that I do, as most of you know, is we discuss the major or the general major that you're thinking about going into. We sort of need that in order to get an idea of the orientation of schools you're going to be directed toward. And as I've spoken with so many of you about, there's a big difference between engineering admissions and kind of everything else. As you know, I also determine where you want to go, location, size. Usually those things aren't very important to most students unless it's like, super like dramatic. Like I don't want to go somewhere with like 200 students. I don't want to go somewhere with 80,000 students. I don't want to go somewhere like in my own zip code. I don't want to go to Mississippi. Otherwise, most people are pretty, pretty open to most things. As long as it's a good school, as long as the rank is there, because at the end of the day, myself included, we're all kind of rank hunting to a certain degree. But most of the time, the largeness, smallness, location, fringe areas notwithstanding, all good. I consider the students' preferences for other factors. Even though we're from a really affluent area, the still, college is expensive and med school is really expensive. So, scholarship likelihood, we discuss that, and I sort out the schools based on that. Safety is always something that I take into consideration. And we discuss that quite a bit from one school to the next. And then based on that, I establish a range of schools that kind of fall within, based on the U.S. News rankings, based on the student's academic, extracurricular, personal profile. And I'm not beholden at all to the U.S. News rankings, but the fact of the matter is that the U.S. News rankings reflect selectivity and they create selectivity. They're very important right now in terms of the dictating how many applications a school gets, which is obviously one of the fundamental criteria of being a selective institution. So U.S. News, for all its problems, still exists as a reality that both reflects and shapes said reality. So based on U.S. News and the U.S. News World Report national rankings, that's where we kind of have a range. If the higher schools, generally speaking, more selective. HYPS, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, more selective than numbers 90 to 93 in the country. How do we, and I will, when developing the college list, I will, as you've seen, indicate if a school is a reach, if it's a target, if it's a safety, in my opinion. Not an exact science as usual. Reach, statistically unlikely, statistically hard. I'm fond of saying that everything really these days within the top 30, unless you're like like USC, number 28 in the country, you're double legacy coming from Harvard Westlake, full pay, trying to think what a recruited athlete, then maybe a school like USC, it kind of falls into it falls into the reach target category. But otherwise, the schools that are the high ranking schools, they're going to be tough, and they're going to be tough in particular coming from the Bay Area, and they're going to be tough in particular coming from the Bay Area public schools. That have a large number of students applying to the same schools that all happen to be selective. That all said, even though top 30 is really hard, you got to apply to them, especially if you've got the numbers. If you've got, if you're knocking on the door of a 3.0, then maybe top 30 is we apply to one or two, and those are the lottery schools, and that's all. Otherwise, if you've done, you're 1,500, 1,550 plus, a couple of Bs, but not many, then, it's nice to put your hat in the ring for a handful of them. As long as you have your safeties. And as I've mentioned, repeatedly, safeties for me, slam dunk, act of God will take you to be denied. So when there's a safety on your list, unless you're, busted doing a crime, it's probably going to wind up staying safe and you're probably going to get in there. If you have 3 or 4 safeties that you're comfortable with, out of a list of like say 15 schools, counting each UC as its own, then you're probably sitting good. Based on at least because like I said, I'm pretty conservative with them. So 15 schools, and students will apply to more than that. And we'll get into how in just a moment. But have a 3 or 4 safeties in there. And as you've seen from many of the lists, I'm really conservative, and you might not like the safeties. People don't want to wind up in like the University of Utah, but this is the world that we live in. So how do we build a balanced list? How do we develop that? Okay, so as I said, you can apply. We do like, on our little thing that we do together, that schools are going to typically be 10 with UC counting as one. But just to give you the layout of how this stacks up overall, with UC, you'll do 6 to 9 probably. Even the best students will do the top six, with UC. Berkeley, LA, San Diego, Davis, Irvine, Santa Barbara. Maybe you're fancy, you're leaving out Santa Cruz, Riverside, and Merced. More often than not, 6 out of 9. This is not for non-California residents usually, but still for CSU, non-California residents don't do any, but us, local folks will do San Jose State, maybe San Diego State. You want to do hospitality, tourism, business, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, the jewel of the Cal State system. And there's no essays with Cal State. So right off the bat, you're doing UC and Cal State. You're up to like 12 schools that you're doing. You're doing another 9 with us with essays. So that gets you to 21. There are a lot that students will do without essays: Northeastern, Case Western, Ohio State, Pitt, Michigan State, where you can copy and paste essays. Penn State, Rutgers, where you can poach and change a little bit. Michigan to the University of Washington. So before you know it, you are applying to 30 schools, and that's, I think, unhealthy in a lot of ways. But I think if you look at that and have them mostly as kind of target schools and a good number of safeties, it can give good options, because really college admissions these days is very unpredictable, especially with popular majors. Um, you can, in other words, cast the net a little bit widely, without doing much more extra work. I don't necessarily suggest casting the net widely within the top 20 or top 30 unless you're around the top 10% of your class. What does that mean? Public schools from our area, from the Bay Area, they don't publish these stats much anymore. But in most cases, you're looking at going into 12th grade, there being 100 students that don't have any B's in your class. Lynbrook just changed their profile in the way that they do it, and they do it in some funky way. Maybe they do it in quartiles now, but the way that they used to do it was very clear. 98 students in the class, 20% more or less, would have a 4.0 going into senior year, going into seventh semester. Usually after seventh semester, that number seems to drop to about 30 at most of the good public high schools in our area. So, you got a lot of people that year, that have, good numbers going into 12th grade. So if you've got, you got a handful of B's, the world is very forgiving. If you're like half B's, half A's, you might want to kind of like, stay away from the top 20, top 30 for the most part. Maybe work at a couple of lottery schools. Now, if you have all the time in the world, all the money in the world, and the resilience, of a titanium coated diamond, then go hog wild and do all 8 Ivies, Caltech, MIT, and just go bananas. There's no harm. You got the time, you got the money for the app fees, you've got the resilience in the face of rejection. Then you can go, cast the net even wider. But if you're like most human beings, then we kind of want to. You got your numbers are meza. Then maybe we dodge the schools with Ivy on the walls. Um, so building a balance list. Let me go through this and let me see if my thing is still up. This thing always refresh. Watch, it's gonna refresh, isn't it? I gotta refresh you. Let me see. Okay, so this is me. This is oh good, you're still there. You're still there. Thank you very much. So this is me. I am an average, not an average, an exceptionally high achieving Silicon Valley high school student. Um uh um uh, uh which does not uncommon, unfortunately. Let's say I've got a couple of B's in there, one or two. I want to do CS. I want to do engineering. I'm looking at a mid 15, low 1500 SAT score. This is how I start, my list. Definitely going to do the University of California. Have some Cal States in there. I'll have a couple of Ivies. Maybe put a couple of other Ivies in there for fun. I got more than a couple of B's, maybe not so much. And I want to do CS. So Cornell's going to be good. Rice will be good. Michigan, Carnegie Mellon obviously has to be up there. Going down to the bottom and looking at the safeties, I'm not going to have any liberal arts colleges in there. Maybe University of the Pacific. Um, so what do I do from here? What do I do in order to kind of to shape this list a little bit more? This is the way that most students are going to wind up looking at this list. They'll say, okay, University of the Pacific. I don't know if I really want to apply there. Since Stockton, I'm a big fan of Stockton. I'll say, okay, look, probably going to get scholarship money there. There's not going to be any essay involved. Okay, great. I'll apply. Seattle University. It's another private school. I've got cheaper safeties that are public, so I don't think I want it. Okay, let's get rid of Seattle. Okay. Arizona State. Yeah, I don't like hot weather. No essays though. And top 35 engineering, top 50 CS. Okay, I'll keep Arizona and Arizona State on. Rochester Institute of Technology, Worcester Polytech, RPI, Rensselaer Polytech. I'm not feeling these guys either. I don't want to go to Worcester, Massachusetts. Like I said, I'm going to have some safeties on my list that are going to be cheaper. I'm going to have I really love, Merced and Riverside. My family's from Riverside. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for me to go to UC Riverside. So why don't I get rid of some of the smaller schools that are gonna cost a little bit of money? Okay, good. So we'll get rid of the small tech schools. That's fine. That makes sense. It's a good financial decision. Pitt, I don't want to go to Pittsburgh unless it's Carnegie Mellon, but no essay. Okay, fine. I'll apply. UMass Amherst, Central Massachusetts, but the essay is almost the same as Purdue. You can kind of copy and paste. Okay, fine. I'll keep that one. Michigan State, I don't want it, but there's no essay. Okay, I'll do it. Penn State, there's no essay. Okay, I'll do it. Santa Clara, here you kind of have to make a decision. Religious school, local school, a couple of essays. They're going to be kind of funky because they're not, they're religious, Catholic type things. But Santa Clara is local. Santa Clara is top 20 in the country as far as feeding into the Silicon Valley. I know I don't like it. It's in my own backyard. Familiarity breeds contempt, but I'll still apply there. Stony Brook, no essay. University of Minnesota, it requires an essay. It's cold. There's tubes underneath the campus to keep people warm. I don't know if I want that. Um, Boston University, a little bit too pricey for me. I don't think I'm going to wind up going down that road. So you get the idea. There are, and we do this back and forth, and you do this on your own. When you're discussing this among yourselves. But there are reasons. Like I said, 2,800 colleges in the country. You have to cut somewhere. And there are reasons to cut a number of these schools. Everything from cost to employability to location. I'm a 17-year-old female. I want the right to choose. Not going to do University of Texas at Austin. I'm a 17-year-old male. I know Georgia Tech isn't very accommodating to males, which is the case. We haven't had a Georgia Tech admit that's a male in the last 5 years. All female. So then you're left with a group, here. Does this look manageable? Not quite yet. But consider in this group, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with Northeastern, 9 with Ohio State, 10 schools that don't require essays. We've got another school, UMass Amherst, where we could poach most of Purdue to write that essay. And another school in University of Washington, where if we do Michigan, it's a Control A, Control C, Control V essay. So here then, we've got 1, 2, 3. Let me see. I'm not counting Cal State's as that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, plus 9 UCs, 31, plus 3 Cal States, 35. And you're writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 essays, 11 sets of essays. So you knock one of those out, doing 10 schools, which is what we do. You're planning like 34 colleges. Now, if you want to front load things and you want to do like top 10 schools in the country, obviously that's a different kettle of fish. But again, standard student that's applying to something like CS engineering, this is how you get a lot of mileage out of the list. Cast the net wide, and make life quite a bit easier on yourself as well. Does it work that way for every major? Not quite. If you want to do meds, we'll get into that in a second. But CS and engineering are quite a bit easier because so much of the rankings dictate selectivity or to dictate employability. With the computer science programs, that is a very kind of limited group that you want to apply to, and so many of them are public, and so many of them don't require essays that it makes life quite a bit easier. So from this group, you know, we eliminated some of the private schools, affordable schools that are safeties, got rid of a real few tough publics, couple of privates in there to apply early decision. And like I said, this is what we have. The landscape changes again when you do more private schools, especially top tier private schools that will have elaborate involved essays. It's just that's why we start this whole process so early, is that because that's what log jams everybody, is the writing, especially the writing for the fancy schools. It's just it's laborious. Um, so building a list, it's not, it's, I mean, it's not hard because I've been doing it for 20 years. It's but it really, it's like you saw that, like, the criteria are not, kind of mind bending. I'm like, okay, I got rid of some of the schools that would be expensive. And with computer science, like I said, it's easier because ultimately you're going to CS in order to get a job. And there's a direct cost there, cost benefit analysis that you've got going on. And if, like, Rensselaer Polytech with, or like Worcester Polytech with all the scholarships in the world, is going to be, still $10,000 more than UC Berkeley. You're not doing, you're not, you know, hard to choose the former. But not every major is going to be that way. Not every major is going to be as direct ROI centric as computer science. And even computer science, there are some nuances in here. So let me go over, the ways that I try to consider evaluating students by major. Especially with the primary majors. I'm not going to go into, like, how do we do, urban studies and ethnic affairs? That's not popular enough to really want, but I can definitely talk about it if you have a question. I can talk about anything. So by major, without further ado. First off, when you're considering your major and when we're considering the college list, we have the overall U.S. News and World Report rankings, as you know. There are also, individual program rankings in computer science, in engineering, and in business for U.S. News. That's, being a little bit difficult right now, but believe you me, it's there. And business for U.S. News. In the cases of CS rankings, of engineering rankings, and of business rankings, these are also significant to take into consideration when looking at the school. You'll run into a number of programs, Exhibit A, Indiana, which is just like, you want to study finance, you can do it on Wall Street, or you do it in the middle of nowhere, Bloomington, Indiana. And really, really good program, feed into Wall Street, Bloomberg terminal on campus, really good internships, the whole 9 yards. But the point is that if you really are definite about CS, engineering, or business, then we want to look at those individual rankings as well, because they do tend to reflect hiring. And, with those disciplines, that's kind of the reason that you're doing it. That's why you're going to the school in particular. So for business and engineering, sorry, I keep starting over this. I'll stop checking out. With business and engineering, consider those individual rankings along with the overall ranking, because they're going to be as important, if not more important. For undergrad programs other than those, there aren't really standard rankings, just so you're aware. If you look at, like, top undergraduate biology programs in the country, you'll come up with a niche list, like niche.com. You'll come up with something on Quora, or you'll get something that will look like an undergrad ranking, but it will really be a graduate school ranking by U.S. News. And it's kind of all over the place what the rankings are. There are some okay ones out there. Like, if you have any interest in international relations, or public policy, or political science for that matter. Their Foreign Policy magazine, up until 6 years ago, wrote something called Inside the Ivory Tower, where they would rank IR programs. And it's really good, from people in the know for, like, foreign policy. You really want more refined business programs, Poets and Quants, this website that does a lot of MBA stuff, really good for undergrad type things. If architecture, like Architectural Digest, does good architecture rankings. But for the most part, there aren't really standard ones. There's kind of like niche ones out there. And for stuff like, like psychology. I mean, like there's like every university has a psychology program, and like, there's very few criteria, for evaluating them. It's not like you start working as a therapist with a bachelor's in psychology. It doesn't, you can't really evaluate outcomes on that. But let's go over the majors, especially the predominant ones. And you can feel free to chat questions about other ones also. If you have a particular question, more likely than not, other people are going to have the same one. So use the chat function instead of the raising the hand. It's just a little bit more anonymous. With the if you like that. So let's start off with computer science and engineering. If this is the interest, what do we want to consider? What do we want to have in the back of our mind as we're developing the college list? Number one, before anything else, you need tons of safeties for CS and engineering. It's like clockwork. Every year around this time, applying to college on Reddit is filled with kids that are like, "Oh my God, how did I not get into Purdue computer science when I'm coming from Alaska?" And it's like, because you're out of state, and they admit it like 10% for out of state. I mean, that's the way that engineering and CS in particular is these days, are these days. Good, strong, super competitive applicant from our area, a couple of B's, 1,500 plus. Person that I was on the database. We're not going to get a true safety for you, like a slam dunk, stone cold lock that 100% on it until we get to maybe Ohio State or the University of Minnesota. 43 and 53 ranking respectively in the country, top 40 CS programs, but we're not going to get to a real safety until those. It's just everything up until then, like Wisconsin included, they're getting tough. Maryland came out last year and made it public how much tougher they were going to get with computer science. UMass Amherst hasn't been a safety for data science or CS in the last 3 years. No UCCS programs, for the most part, are going to be safeties until you get to like, Riverside and Merced and Santa Cruz for a number of students. But Davis, Irvine, Santa Barbara, San Diego, LA, Berkeley, there's a reason to waitlist anyone. I mean, we've got students this year that are like get into like Wellesley and Georgia Tech, and they're like Carnegie Mellon, and like waitlisted Santa Barbara. It's like, yeah. And if you want to say yield protection, but UC doesn't do that. It's that competitive. So no UCCS programs for the most part are going to be safeties. San Jose State for the most part will not be a safety. I'm sorry to tell you. San Jose State, I think their CS program has a cutoff these days for like a 4.125 or 4.25 Cal State GPA. You get a service area bump if you're in Santa Clara County of, I think, 0.125 grade points for Cal State, for San Jose State, because like I said, you're in the service area, but even then, you need almost no B's in order to look good for San Jose State CS. And like I mentioned with Purdue, and this, everybody knows this. This is not like new. Out-of-state publics are tough for computer science. Illinois is at 4% 2 years ago. We'll see what the newest Freedom of Information Act data request gets us. Purdue, most the word on the street is that they're around 10% for out-of-state. UW makes it public. It's on their website, 2% out-of-state for CS. So the public schools for computer science are just super duper hard, and you're coming in as an out-of-state student in most cases. So this is one reason, and we're not going to talk about this right now. This is one reason why, if there's a public school that offers early action that you want to apply to, you got to apply by the early action deadline, the one that doesn't bind you, but you got to get it in while the getting's good. Because if you wait until the regular decision deadline, you're competing with in-state kids for limited seats, and it's no bueno. So yeah, computer science, long story short, have a bunch of safeties. And I'm very, very conservative with computer science safeties. I don't I'm all about confidence and optimism and stuff like that. But I've learned over the past 20 years, you don't want to get to like April and then have a bunch of unhappy people. I try and really lay it out as as terrifyingly as possible, and make sure that if we have a safety that's listed, that's something that you are going to get into. All right. So good. Click. These are the schools that I would say remain somewhat accessible. I said Wisconsin's getting harder. Maryland's getting harder. The other guys, these guys, though, I would say are for the most part still within range. Wisconsin tough. One of Wisconsin's thing is, by the way, you apply into arts and sciences. You take 3 CS classes, minimum C-, then you can transfer successfully into CS. Rutgers is a school that seems to be getting harder as of late, and it'll get more harder. It'll get more difficult next year. Vatech every year I think is going to get a lot harder. You know, top 25 CS, top 15. Engineering overall, location's the only bad thing about it. #2 food in the country. Maryland's getting tougher. Like I said, they've got it on their application now that, you know, CS is going to be really hard. And if you ever wanted to get into CS, you got to apply directly because we're not admitting transfers, like all caps. University of Pittsburgh still accessible, no essays unless you want to apply to the honors college. Michigan State still accessible, no essays. University of Colorado still accessible. Although there were a lot of people on College Confidential this year that seems that they misunderstood Colorado as being a safety when it shouldn't have been. Utah, very interesting story, as I've mentioned to a couple of you. One of our essay consultants, Molly, her dad was one of the creators of Mortal Kombat, the video game. And he went to the University of Utah, and that's what you hear about Utah is a really good game design program. Seems like a thrilling state to be in too. NC State is coming up in the rankings. A couple of essays there that are a little bit annoying. Penn State, you know, very accessible still. You can Control A, Control C, Control V, a Common App essay, and that should work for Penn State next year. Arizona State, no essays, no transcript, no test scores. Just type in the grades, click submit, and you're good to go. And U of A should be the same. And Rensselaer Polytech, RPI, Worcester Polytech, Rochester Institute of Technology, Stevens Institute of Technology, the mid-major conference, so to speak, of the tech school, the private ones that aren't too big, aren't too itty-bitty, like Olin or Rose-Hulman. Those guys are accessible and they'll come through with money. Will they come through with enough money to make it the same as UC? Probably not. I'll get to cost of attendance in just a moment too, and because that's obviously a criterion that a lot of people are asking about. But for computer science, there's quite a bit that's still accessible. Is it going to be a place that's you know, that's like you've always dreamed of going? Probably not, you know. But you know, that's why these are safer schools. So, you know, that's the thing. Nobody really gets super duper excited about the safeties until like the middle of March. They're like, God, thank God I had the safeties. Okay, so that's what we need to keep in mind for computer science. Lots of safeties, lots of backup plans. There's still some accessible things out there for backup plans, but they're it's not it is tough. It's tough to balance the school that you want to go to with the school that's going to admit you. But all the solid CS programs, like I said, tend to do good with the hiring. Okay, but moving on to business. With business, several things to keep in mind when we're developing the list. And this is if you're really committed to doing business. Number one, at the University of California, more often than not, you will not be pursuing a Bachelor of Business Administration. So just be aware of that. For most UC campuses, and for really most top 20 private schools, there's not a Bachelor of Business. There is an economics degree that you'll typically study, some version of applied economics and management, or something like that. That doesn't really matter that much, you know. With if you wanted to study accounting, you'd really need a very highly structured business program. But even in the case of something like finance, you know, Harvard undergraduate doesn't have a Bachelor of Business. They've only got it at the graduate level. And it doesn't stop people from Harvard from going into like private equity or investment banking. Same with the University of Chicago, same with Yale. You know, no undergrad business programs, but doesn't stop many people from going in there. But those types of schools, like, outside of that, outside of the schools that are like, by name alone, you're kind of getting into finance. What else is going to be there as far as, accessible business programs? A ton of Midwestern state schools. That's been the case for a long time, where between Indiana, as we have up there, Penn State, not really Midwestern, but you get the idea. Michigan State, Purdue, Minnesota, you're going to Ohio State. You're going to have a lot of top business programs that are not impossible to get into. In the case of Indiana, as I've mentioned before, they're the jewel that I think is going to wind up. Let me see. What I'm trying to think. They're the carriage that I think is going to turn into a pumpkin. To use the Cinderella metaphor, any day now, because we've gotten so the Indiana program. It says, as I've mentioned to many of you, it's a direct admission program to the Kelley School of Business, where you need a 3.8, I think 3.8 or 3.9 GPA, and a 1390 or 3.8, 3.8, 1390, and you're guaranteed admission. Um, uh, the the opportunities are really good. They've got good connections with Wall Street. As I mentioned, they've got a Bloomberg terminal on campus. Internship opportunities are supposed to be through the roof. Is it a school that you've always dreamed of going to? No, probably not. But if you are 100% committed to something like finance, then it's worth considering. Then, in this case, you could probably forego the pedigree, the overall rank, and come out on the other end um, no worse. The same thing with Southern Methodist. Southern that nobody's heard of, I'm sure. Top 20 in the country as far as feeding into investment banks and private equity. It's oddly good at business and finance in particular. The same thing with Penn State. The Smeal School has been selective for some time, but it's not overwhelmingly selective. And again, top 25 in finance, still very accessible. Hold on, let me see what we got for questions. Okay, college is for a psychology major. Kind of. That's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about next with psychology, in particular. Um, Potential national merit finalists that can become safeties. Yeah, good question. For the schools that would be okay, why don't I just go over each of these and that's all good. All right, so I'll answer live. Um, will you be talking about questions for a psychology major? Yeah, because psychology, I would say, would be the type of major where you'd be in this situation. Most universities are going to have these majors, and they're not going to differ tremendously in quality. With you'll have at big public schools, um, uh, um, uh, you're going to have graduate students teaching intro classes. At smaller private schools, you're going to have the opportunities that you'd get for any other major. If you wanted to do something that entailed psychiatry or entailed something having to do with medical science, then you would benefit from attending a school that would have some sort of a connection to a medical center. If you were going into psychology, not necessarily knowing what you were going to go into. Or it could be anything from like going into family counseling, getting a master's in social work, getting getting a PsyD, um, uh, um, the then that would be something where you're not going to find a particular school that's going to really be better at that. It's going to be the same thing with literature. Maybe like, every once in a while you'll find something like there's this really famous author, T.C. Boyle, that used to teach classes at USC. But it would be like, seminars where it was for like juniors and seniors. So it wasn't anything where it was like the whole literature department at USC, was comprised of people that were like, Pulitzer winners. They were good. But could you get the same thing from Cal, from Illinois? Yeah. I mean, they've got top staff in there. Would he be able to get the same thing from Fordham or Gonzaga? Probably not that much. A lot of the programs are going to wind up the level of faculty are going to wind up reflecting the rank of the university. Will you find some exceptions? Yeah, like the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, which nobody again has heard of, has the Sewanee Review, and it's the repository for the Faulkner archives from William Faulkner. So if you're interested in William Faulkner or another Southern author, then the University of the South at Sewanee, the place to go. But outside of that, You can find it at solid, stellar English programs at Yale, at Harvard, at Stanford. Going to find them at USC. Going to find them at top flagship publics. Going to find them a little bit less so at mid-level schools. And there'll be some pockets of liberal arts colleges that'll have some solid programs. But otherwise, there's not going to be anything that'll be very consistent among most arts and sciences majors. The other thing is with arts and sciences too is you can move around so easily. And for the benefit or for the traction of the job. So good question. Okay, so psych. Next one for national merit finalists, semifinalists. Are there schools that can become safeties? Yes, but not schools that you'd necessarily want to go to. It would be, or I mean, not that that like you in general, but probably you, the person asking this question, wouldn't want to go to, like Alabama, Mississippi, University of Arkansas, which every year talks about the national merit finalists that they get. That doesn't happen at the top level. I mean, the national merit is great. It's not great. It's just it's there. It's College Board's recognition thing that the highest level school that I've seen it help with anything is USC with their half tuition scholarship. For everybody else, national merit is a test that that's an award based on how you did on a test that doesn't matter. Or national merit is an award that's based on a test that you took that doesn't matter. Arizona State might. Northeastern, they could come through with more money. But it wouldn't really be that much. I mean, the one that's at least among the top schools, the one that's the biggie is USC with the half tuition one. Even national merit itself is like a one-time $2,500 a year scholarship. So it'll help. It'll help mostly though at the schools where it's going to be, it'd be a foregone conclusion that you're going to get in anyways. Maybe it'll help with some marginal scholarship offer, but typically not among the schools that are going to be the most attractive schools as far as you're concerned. Okay. All right. Let me see. We had a hand raised. If you could, for the hand raised, just chat the question right in there, and I'll get to it. Okay, just two more questions. Biomedical engineering and biomedical science, so a major question in medical school applications, and then pre-med college selection and application. So let me go into those actually both now because that was something that I skipped over with okay. So the last one we talked about, with schools where students have an interest in engineering programs. It's a very standard set of schools that tend to be good at that. For students that have an interest in business, there's generally a standard set of schools that'll offer a business program, and that's how you select those. On the other end of the spectrum, there are majors like psychology and English that are going to be offered everywhere. And that might have slight nuances between the quality of the program, but it's not anything that's going to be, I would say, specific to an individual program. There'll be the big flagship schools that have a good amount of resources. The top tier schools will have the better faculty. But even in that case, you're going to wind up running into those faculty a little bit later down the line in your college career. So I would say that the precise quality of the individual program is not going to be so much of a variance that it would dominate how you selected the school. The overall ranking, the affordability, the safety, those would be things that I think would wind up dictating more about where you would decide to, rather than like a program rank that doesn't exist for those types of majors. However, between those two, there's another one. There's med and there's health sciences. And there's also others that I haven't gone into, like architecture or nursing, or real niche professional programs. But we can talk about those too. It's just that's something that tends to be relevant to a small group of people. But for med health and for biosciences, you have a little bit more flexibility with the list, and you can make it a little bit more personal. Now, ultimately, you will find that prestige means a lot to medical school, and this is among many reasons Why you'll find a 92% acceptance rate from Harvard and Stanford to medical school, where the national average will be somewhere in the 40s. With the But still, you'll have more flexibility with the list because you're not applying directly into medical school. You're applying into a program that'll allow you to prepare for medical school. And to be frank, you could have any major, and that'll allow you to go into medical school as long as you have the dozen or so pre-med requirements. With You could have a major in molecular cell developmental biology, in human biology, in biochem, in public health, in philosophy, in English, and so forth. It's nice to have a little bit of diversity in there too. You want to make sure that you've got the science classes, and you need to make sure, obviously, you've got the pre-med coursework. But you are not applying directly into a medical school. You're applying into a place where you're preparing for medical school. You're applying to a place where you need to make sure that you can get a good GPA, where you can get access to good practical experiences. The public universities in particular, tends to be a little bit tougher with this. When you look at schools like Berkeley, and Berkeley's not representative of every public school, but Berkeley's hard. Berkeley's really hard for pre-med. Organic chemistry is really, really hard in the ultimate weeder class. Is Berkeley going to allow you to very easily and without many obstacles get a good pre-med science and overall GPA? No. Will most publics allow for that? Well, no, but you'll find some that'll be easier than others. And as I've mentioned to several folks, over the past several years, we've had a number of students that have turned down Berkeley for Irvine and Santa Barbara and Davis because they're just more. They're not quite as cutthroat. They're not as hard to get the GPA at. And you can make the same argument for maybe like a school like Santa Clara or a school like the University of the Pacific. Are they going to are they going to have the same admit rate to medical school as Harvard? No. But you can put yourself in a better situation than you can in a lot of other schools as a result of the lack of competition, grade deflation, and the easier access to faculty. On the flip side, depending on where your priorities are, and depending on your relationship with money, which is none of my business, the medical school debt is around $250,000. So on the front end, it doesn't hurt to have to have schools that are going to save you a couple of dollars. You're not carrying as much debt during your first couple of years of life. And typically, private schools aren't the best at allowing you to save money. So what do? You go to the public school that's where it's difficult to get the grades. But you have a lot of the resources as long as you're really aggressive and you can get the grades, but you really have to work hard and you save the money, and maybe you've got the name recognition. Or do you go to the place where you're maybe not saving the money, but you might have more access to resources? And that's a personal decision, and it's something that's a question that we discuss when you have the results in hand and when we see exactly what we're working with. Um, so what does that mean? On a more practical sense, we will have the standard schools that you'll apply to. We're going to wind up having the UCs. We're going to have, probably for students that are more ambitious, the fancier schools, the top 20 schools, the schools that are going to have the admit rate and the high numbers for med, and that are going to really prepare you and allow you to develop the resume for med. But it's good, I think, to mix in a few schools that are going to wind up are going to be easier to get into, are not going to be quite as cutthroat while you're there, might wind up coming through with money, and are a good fallback in lieu of UC. The ones that I have here are Case Western Reserve, which is getting harder to get into, especially if you're applying regular decision. University of the Pacific, which is going to be a safety for many students. George Washington University, which is going to be, I'd say, a safety for many students. University of Rochester, getting less safe, but a school that's really oriented to pre-med, and toward pre-health sciences. They've got their own med school. They've got an accelerated med program. 75% of the students do undergrad research. That's going to wind up being these are the schools that are going to be worthwhile to work in, along with the other standard group of schools that are going to be in the general range of schools that we're considering. and I mentioned this when we go over the colleges as well. We might want to dodge schools that have grade deflation or that are well known for it, like Berkeley. You'll apply to Berkeley. You want to have that as an option. But ultimately, when push comes to shove and you have to decide upon the school, will you choose Berkeley? Maybe. If you're really confident in your ability to thrive in a high stress environment, and be as aggressive with the opportunities as you need to be. Other schools that are well known for grade deflation are Boston University. For whatever reason, Wellesley College up until recently had a quota on A's in particular classes. They've since eliminated that, but the vestiges of the policy are still there, and it's still hard to get A's. And there are some standard schools that I talk about when we meet. MIT, the standard thing is friends, grades, or sleep. Choose two. A University of Chicago, where fun goes to die. Cornell, which is incredibly difficult, especially when it winds up coming to the sciences. Johns Hopkins, which is very, very toxic and is just super rigorous and demanding. Are there advantages to going to a school like Hopkins? Yeah. Are there advantages to going to Chicago? Of course. MIT, no question. But these are schools that are illustrative of not having the of not allowing you to land the highest GPA without much effort. You still have to put in a good amount of work to these schools. So with med, a lot of this is going to be personal. Do we want schools that are going to be that are do we want schools that are going to allow you the access to resources? Do we want schools that are going to allow you the access to higher grades? Do we want schools that are going to save you money? Do we want schools that are going to have accelerated med programs? Do we want schools that are going to have BSDO programs, which is a recent request? These are all kind of niche, narrow things. We talk about these one-on-one, but no matter what, I think it's a good idea to have a layer of safeties for the med programs, where the focus of the schools does tend to be with health sciences. And outside of the top 30, top 35 in the country, this is where I would focus. These schools work. Northeastern, to mention a school that also, that was also discussed. Those also work. Okay, question. And also question. Differences between biomedical engineering and biomedical science, which would be the better fit to provide for medical school application post-college? So BME or biomedical science. BME is going to be harder. BME is going to have, probably a little bit less flexibility in the curriculum. Being under an engineering program, the general education requirements are going to be, typically more rigorous. And the space for electives, where you can take classes that'll be a bit easier, or that are even like pre-med classes that you can't fit anywhere else, though could be a little bit tougher. In the case of biomedical science, you don't have to worry about it being under an engineering umbrella. You don't have to worry about the structure of the degree program not permitting you the flexibility. And typically the classes will be a little bit easier. With biomedical science, you'll be under arts and sciences. You'll have your standard general education classes that you have to do. So at least as far as space in the degree program, as well as the ease of getting the GPA, I would say biomedical science would probably be the more prudent way of going. BME, is going to be a more practical degree program. So if you wanted to have your cake and eat it too, like, I will be employable after undergrad, and I will also be in a good position to apply to medical school, then BME would be the one that would take that would be the winner. But, if engineering can decimate your GPA. That's the thing, is that the engineering component can make it really, really tough. All right, pre-med college selection, I went over that a bit. And any other questions, please jump in with and let me know in the chat if there's in particular, what you wanted to go into. So again, to revisit, psychology, most majors under arts and sciences, unless you really wanted to make it very, very niche, like you're looking at a particular type of literature that you want to study. There's a particular fellow, like, you want to do ethnic studies and you want to study under Cornel West. And I think he teaches at like Harvard or Princeton. Like that's the kind of thing where you need, you need to put that fine a point on it in order to really have a degree of separation between, the kind of what's offered at those majors. Otherwise the quality of the major is often going to be reflected by the quality of the institution. But there are some cases where it's not the case. Like you want to study like Holocaust literature, Boston University is really good. Elie Wiesel used to teach there, so so all that stuff. Um, yeah, with engineering, we want a lot of safeties. With business, you want to make sure that you look at those rankings as well, because those are going to want to dictate something else about employability and ability to land sort of lucrative jobs, especially in something like finance. And med, it's going to be largely personal and reflective of your what direction you want to go as far as your priorities and preferences. Um, Yes. With other things that we want to other things that we want to consider while we're as we're going through the selection process, because obviously the major is going to be significant, but but in the case of as I mentioned, in something like you know you know English, Soc, that's not going to wind up being, you're not going to be able to find a lot of, unless you're really attuned to the nuances of what you want, which most students at this age are not. Then you're going to want to consider other factors in terms of cutting down the college list. Um, and like I mentioned here, this is something I was going to get to anyways. There with niche majors, and we don't have many, if any, this year. Architecture, nursing, combined physician assistance programs, BSDO, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine, as I mentioned, or like BSJD programs. Those are different. Um, Anything that's going to be a direct entry professional program, it's going to be a little bit different. There'll be some studio art programs, obviously, that'll be very, very different. That'll be mostly portfolio based, and obviously, music programs will be very different. Um, uh, um, uh, and those are programs, studio art and music things where you are looking at particular faculty. We have, and many of you, if you've got, if you've got budding musicians, you're aware of like the piano or the violin faculty at everywhere from from Curtis to Shepherd to Peabody, and that'll kind of dictate the degree that you want to go after them. Let me actually mention this one thing though. Well, no, I'm going to get to that when I get to cost of attendance. This is something that the student asked about with national merit, and how that'll wind up playing out as far as impacting the college decision as well as scholarships. But I'll get to scholarships in just a moment. Um, okay, so what about niche majors? Already went over that. Um, uh, what about safety? This is something again that we speak about when talking about the individual schools. Every school is going to have to disclose their safety figures. That's been the case for the last 40 or some odd years through the Jean Cleary Act, that makes the school disclose everything that's happened from students to staff, and everything from petty larceny all the way up to murder and manslaughter. Typically, when you look at the crime numbers for a particular school, believe it or not, large urban public schools, tend to have the most on-campus crime of some sort. Cal tends to be up there. Michigan tends to be up there. Ohio State and Columbus tends to be up there. University of Washington, tends to be up there. What does that say? I don't know. With that, I mean, because these are like open campuses kind of, and they are in the middle of the city. But you'll also find that it's not always restricted to the public schools. You do hear obviously things about Hopkins, not being in a great area, and things on campus seems like it's okay, but you go off campus and it's a little bit of a different story. University of Chicago tends to pop up frequently with issues. There was an international student that was shot 3 years ago, I believe, in a parking structure. USC, again, urban campuses in the middle of everything. You don't get it at UCLA, but it's a different area. At USC, there was back in the 90s, it was a war zone. Now it's much better, but still a couple of years ago there was a kid of an Oakland City Council member that was shot and killed at a 7-Eleven around there. Um, I hear things about Drexel, and Temple in Philadelphia. You'll hear things from people at Penn that feel as though they don't. I mean, Penn is pretty integrated into the city. People don't feel super duper comfortable, there. You don't get it as much at the at the schools that aren't as open or in the middle of everything. You don't get it much at Boston College, up in Chestnut Hill. You don't get it like Wellesley. You don't get it in Middlebury. There are some schools though that that you have to you dig a little bit and you find some ugly stuff. There's a particular school in New Hampshire that tends to have a very high rate of sexual assault. Dartmouth. There tends to be, at least as far as news articles over the past 10 years or so have indicated. Back at the in the and it's even still to this day, Duke has some issues with you know uh the racist graffiti and so on and so forth. But outside of these things, which are obviously significant and make people feel very uncomfortable for obvious reasons, you will find that the larger campuses, the urban campuses, and the public schools in particular are going to be the ones that have the 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 toughest time with kind of handling the crime situation. But I haven't found that most people are reluctant to apply to UW or to Cal, or to Michigan. I think because those schools, even though they're urban, they're not quite Chicago and Baltimore, and that's where people tend to draw the line a little bit. But there's a good amount of information out there. We discussed it in all of our meetings as far as individual schools go. I try and really give people an idea of like one school that's not on the list that I haven't seen. I don't see Georgia Tech, and that is an urban public school. Like it's the middle of everything. I don't see Georgia Tech up there much. Um, the other UCs you don't either. Um, so safety is something that you can safety is something that can be intuitive, but when you look at the numbers, there's a little bit the more that comes out, and especially in the case of some of the privates, it's something that you need to dig a little bit for. When I find it, I let everybody know. Let me just see this. One sec. Okay, another attendee. Okay, good question. Um, for a computer science major, would you suggest applying to a private schools with a different major and transfer to CS after you get in? That's an excellent question. It depends on the school and it depends on the student. If you're going to be if you're going to be it depends on the school. I mean, because look at it this way. You're going to be doing the exact same thing at Wisconsin. You'd be doing the exact same thing at Minnesota that doesn't allow direct entry into CS. So, which one would you prefer? Or would you prefer to go to a public school with a higher CS ranking that you could transfer into, or do you prefer to go to a private school that you could transfer into? Because there are some public schools where you could, I guess maybe that's kind of the point that I'm getting at. There are some public schools where you can still do that. Virginia Tech, as I said, Wisconsin. Um, would you be able to do that at private school? Yes, in almost all cases. Carnegie Mellon, no. Um, Other schools tend to be a little bit restrictive. Like Cornell doesn't. They need you to like wait a year before you start transferring schools. But in many other cases, it can work. The only question is that a lot of in the times where it can work, like with Stanford, you're not. There's no real difference between the evaluation of majors. You're going in undeclared. In the case of you know, same thing with Rice. You're going in, undeclared. So is there going to be any help, going in or applying as a different major? If you have the profile to do it, if you have nothing aside from computer science activities and hackathons, and head of the programming club, and machine learning algorithms that you've developed, are you going to be able to sell yourself as like a gender studies major? Probably not. Would you want to maybe go in as a data science major? Maybe, if you could kind of frame it in such a way that it shows your love of both computer science and the humanities and the social sciences or something like that. But the bottom line is, in the case where a school will allow you to transfer and freely float, it's usually the case that there's not that much of a difference between CS and everything else on the front end to begin with. Like I said, Stanford, you're admitted undeclared. Choose anything you want. MIT, you're admitted undeclared. Choose anything you want. Wisconsin, you're admitted to arts and sciences. Just make sure you take the prerequisite classes. You can transfer into CS. Same thing with Virginia Tech, whether you're under engineering. So yeah, in theory, not a bad idea. In practice, it doesn't work all the time, because students don't have the profile, and in many cases, it doesn't even impact the admissions decision to begin with. Great question. All right, good. Done, 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 done. Great. Okay. So this is when I was going to come back to the very good question on national merit, at least, and how that winds up working with scholarship money. And this really is more about kind of just general cost of attendance, which for you folks that are a handful of folks that are out of state, this is not going to be quite as relevant, but I'll try and make it relevant at least on the private school angle. So among all the criteria that people are going to consider, it's obviously you've got the rank, and that drives everything for everybody. People will they'll sell a limb if they need to do it to afford Stanford. You've got the rank, you've got the prestige, you've got the major rank, you've got other factors, everything from safety to opportunities, to proximity as far as flights are concerned. But what about the cost? How is that going to wind up differing? And I've done this with several people, but I at least want to give some people some context for what they're going to encounter, to at least allow them to put things in context. So the baseline for many folks, and this is not going to be for folks from like New Jersey or Massachusetts, but you're going to have Rutgers and UMass, so you can kind of play along. This is your baseline. This is San Jose State. Off campus, food and housing, tuition, transportation, miscellaneous expenses, $33,000 out the door. So that's CSU. I mean, your baseline is not going to college at all, right? I mean, that's the real baseline. And then after that, it's community college, but we're not including that as an option right now. So for in-state folks, Cal State is going to be your best option. For folks in Massachusetts, I would imagine, UMass Boston would be. For anybody in New Jersey, Rutgers, State University of New Jersey, Montclair State or something like that. So here we've got CSU baseline. Now we've got UC. UC for in-state is the next one up. On campus, 42,236 a year. For out-of-state students, quite a bit more. You're subsidizing a lot for the in-state kids. 76,000 for out-of-state. But 42,000 for in-state, still manageable. $9,000 more than Cal State's not bad. How bad is out-of-state going to be? It depends. It'll depend on the school. So for California residents, what are we looking like for out-of-state? Here we've got from just kind of scattered throughout the page. This guy right here with the gold is Purdue. Purdue is literally cheaper for out-of-state than UC is for in-state. Tremendous. This one here is the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. More than Purdue, but not quite as much as we're getting, with a private institution. And then we've got Michigan here for upper div, out-of-state, 80,000 something per year. So range literally doubles from Purdue to Michigan. And with most schools in between, and that's why I have Illinois here, is that Illinois tends to reflect the majority of schools of this level, where we're going to have where we're going to where your tuition is largely going to fall. But privates can be a different kettle of fish. Not so fancy privates will be out the door around $70,000 a year. Now, this is something where this is what I wanted to come back to when we're talking about the national merit question. Now, is national merit going to play a direct role in any scholarship amount? Maybe for niche schools that have national merit, where they want to attract national merit scholars, within the top 50, but there aren't tons of those out there. Maybe Northeastern might, USC does, as I said. And the majority of other schools that'll give some weight to that are going to largely be flagships in the Southeast and the Southwest. But when if you're at that level, you're going to get money from the mid-major type schools. Is this going to really matter for students that are doing CS? Probably not. Is it going to matter for med kids or kids that want to consider graduate school, that want to consider racking up money in law school? Perhaps. Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. It's kind of like Santa Clara North. $71,000 a year cost of attendance. If you've got a 1450 or better and a 3.75, 3.8 or better, they're probably coming out, $20,000 a year. Is that going to be as cheap as UC? No. It's going to be, still another $8,000 more than UC. Is that worth it for some people? Yeah, potentially. If you want to go to med school, you want to do, and Gonzaga is probably not the best illustration of that. Maybe University of the Pacific might be, but you want to go to med school, UOP, good access, good opportunities, making things almost as cheap as UC, but easier to get the grades, easier to get the advising, easier to actually access career services than at a large public. It's going to be, it'll be at least worth considering. Would it be enough to kind of, in the case of med, sacrifice the ranking of like a top 40 school, top 30 school for Gonzaga? Probably not, depending on how your relationship with money is. But still, if you want a place where, you've got graduate school in the future and it's going to be, a whopper of a cost, and the undergrad institution's pedigree and rank might not be as important, then not worthless to think about. But these are mid-level privates. About the fancy privates, we're getting a little bit more. And that's not always the case, and even in the case of like, a lot of the fancy privates with the Ivies, they're making the cost of attendance nothing for people that make like less than $150,000 a year. But for many schools, this is what we're going to wind up being at, that are going to be in the top 30 that might not come through with money. USC is at this level. NYU's at this level. There was a post on Reddit the other night about a student that just got his projected tuition bill from Vanderbilt. And there was a couple of other costs in there that was like a real high-powered laptop that he needed for his major or something, and it pushed it over $100,000 a year. So just be aware that there's going to be, and USC is great with financial aid, and they're very, very good with scholarships. And as the National Merit student mentioned, National Merit finalists that are admitted to USC, as long as you list USC as your first choice school, that they'll come out of pocket, half tuition to every year, and that's $35,000 a year. So great. But not everybody is, a National Merit finalist, and not everybody is that's a National Merit finalist is going to get in. So the issue still remains that these schools can be pricey. Is it worth it? Again, depends on your relationship with money. It depends on the goal. With like I often say with like NYU, if you do finance, you get into Stern. Is that $95,000 a year cost of attendance worth it? Possibly so. Is it worth it if you're going with doing film studies? Well, again, it depends on your relationship with money. Different strokes for different folks. Something that I said I would not go into, but it's also going to be a criterion when going over the school list to a certain extent is early action and early decision. And just to give you an idea of how things worked out for us this year, a little bit of a teaser, early action and early decision mattered, but it didn't matter for everything. We had 3 Northwestern admitted this year. 2 were admitted early. 1 was admitted regular. We had 1 Cornell this year. She was admitted regular. We had 2 Wellesley this year. Both were admitted regular. We had 2 Emory this year. Both were admitted regular. Carnegie Mellon, both admitted early. And Carnegie Mellon is a school that doesn't statistically give any advantage. So that was kind of the weird sticky wicket. Rice, One early decision, one regular decision. Obviously, all the UCs are regular decision. So, we will that the early decision school is important. And in many cases, especially for the schools down here, as you see, that make kind of a living off of early decision, and and take the lion's share of the students from the early decision pool. It obviously is super significant. You apply to Tulane as a regular decision candidate or Northeastern as a regular decision candidate. Good luck with your 1 in 25 or 1 in 33 chance of getting in. But with outside of this, I would say that it would be it's definitely helpful, but it's not a deal breaker if you don't do it. Ultimately, also, you can only apply to one school early decision. Um, you can apply to an infinite number of schools or early action. Specifically, public schools will have early action plans typically, and so many of you engineering folks will apply to public schools that it's important to get everything in by the 11-1 deadline. Engineering kids will do 6 or 7 schools early in any given year. But when we talk about the results, we'll go over early action, how that exactly played into things. But early decision, does bump up the odds of getting in at a number of schools. But it's not a deal breaker if you don't decide to apply early decision. For CS engineering schools, as I said, we're probably looking at 5 or 6. If CS engineering students, 5 or 6 for early action. Think of standard engineering students, you're doing UC is November 30th, so that doesn't count as early. University of Washington is 11/15, so that doesn't count as early. But students will usually do Purdue, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Texas, Georgia Tech, and that's just off the top of my head. You'll have a lot of others. You'll also have many that don't require essays. SUNY Stony Brook, Rutgers, Penn State, the Control A, Control C, Control V essays, and so forth. Early decision, already went over that. Carnegie Mellon, oddly does not give much of a bump, according to them. But, according to us this year, we were 2 for 3, 2 for 3 for 2 for 4 for early decision. So, good. Something else to consider and some kind of frequently asked questions, visits. How will this play into it? Most students, if they visit, they will visit over spring break, which you just had or you're going to be having soon, or over the summer. You do not need to visit a school in order to have a chance at it. You do not need to visit a school in many cases in order to up your chance of getting in. There are some, though, where I would say that you should do that. I would say that, and some cases where you should visit things. I think that if you have no idea about the type of school that you'd like, and when I ask you what size school do you want, you're like somewhere between 100 and 100,000, then you should probably visit schools that are small, medium, and large size for no other reason than just to kind of get an understanding of how big these things are. And you can do that in the Bay in a day and a half. Between Santa Clara, Stanford, or St. Mary's, Stanford, and Cal. Small private, bigger private, big public. But that's a good reason to understand kind of the archetypes of a school. When else should you visit to establish interest? Not very frequently. You will not, visiting typically does not help, with the Ivies or top 20 schools. It is good content for the essays. It's always nice to say that you've gone somewhere. But there are very few schools that are going to where it's going to have a direct impact on the application. There are some, though, where I'd say it would have a direct impact on the application. Notably, smaller schools where you need to differentiate yourself a little bit. For students from California, I would say that applies to the Claremont colleges, as well as schools like Santa Clara. This year for Santa Clara, for instance, we had a number of students that were overqualified to Santa Clara and not admitted, and they had no connection to the university. We had other schools that I wouldn't say were underqualified, but they had less qualifications than the students that were overqualified. As the name might indicate. and they were admitted, and they all had connections to the school. Obviously, very small sample size. Potentially, could you attribute that to yield protection? No, I don't think so. I would say that if the students with the big numbers visited Santa Clara, they would have had the same options. Um, I believe that there is a tendency on the part of schools like Santa Clara, maybe like USF, like Loyola Marymount, more like Loyola Marymount and Santa Clara, that are getting more selective, and Santa Clara in particular getting much more selective, where they want to make sure that the students from their area are not applying there as a booby prize, where they'll only go there for the very worst situation. The only way that you can really change the school's mind about that is by having a connection to the school, visiting or applying early, visiting and applying early. So long story short, in the case of a school like Santa Clara, those mid-level schools that a lot of schools regionally will wind up, I don't know, I mean, the illustration maybe, in New Jersey would be Seton Hall. Massachusetts, for anybody that we got there. BC, but not really. They're still pretty selective. BU, but they're still selective too, admitting at like 9% this year. But in our area, Santa Clara, definitely. Additionally, schools to visit for students from up here, the Claremont colleges. It was the case before the pandemic. The Claremont colleges would really advocate students visiting if they wanted to be considered, especially for California residents. So Claremont McKenna, Harvey Mudd, Pomona, Pitzer, Scripps. They say that they don't do that anymore, but it is something where if you have the opportunity to visit, you should take advantage of it. Something I did not talk about much today because people typically do not apply, but I always try and push and advocate for our liberal arts colleges. We've been talking almost exclusively about the U.S. News and World Report, top 30 schools and top 100 schools in the country. But LACs are far easier to get into these days, and you can really leverage early decision extensively. For the record, the schools that tend to be the best at CS and engineering, Harvey Mudd and Swarthmore are the two biggies. Harvey Mudd with the Claremont colleges, Swarthmore in Philadelphia. Both put a lot of students in the Silicon Valley. Haverford is up there also. Grinnell College, Davidson College, Macalester College, Williams and Amherst. So liberal arts colleges that do have some presence in STEM fields, particularly in the Silicon Valley. For business and finance, as odd as it might sound, there are a number that are out there that are good too. Locally, we've got Claremont McKenna. Civilization prospers with commerce being its motto. Middlebury and Colgate. Middlebury in Vermont, Colgate in New York are both feeders to investment banks. Middlebury, I believe, no, Colgate, one of their grads is like it's a higher up for Barclays, and Middlebury has a real connection to investment banks. So in spite of being liberal arts colleges that don't have a standard bachelor's of business administration and are largely focused on humanities, as a result of the connection, the alumni connection, they really do have quite a bit of a foot up, it seems, with investment banks, private equity, and so forth. Pre-med is definitely something that you could do at liberal arts colleges, although nobody really does. Again, but Amherst, Bowdoin, Wellesley, Pomona College, all of those are among top 10 feeders to med, top 15 feeders to med, proportional to the student body. You can get excellent opportunities. They're great with placement. Education is top notch, good access to letters of recommendation. Wellesley has the bad grade deflation. They put a lot of students into medical school, but as I said, they tend to slaughter their undergrads GPA as a result of policy. But with liberal arts colleges, I wish I had a reason to mention this as anything more than an afterthought. But I've tried every year to push people to do LACs, but nobody's heard of them enough. And you don't want to put your trust in something that you want to go to Bowdoin College and Bar Harbor, Maine. I don't know anybody's going to Bowdoin. You're thinking to yourself, my God, this thing costs 90 grand a year. You down country across. I have to take 5 flights to get to my kids. But still, it's why don't you go to Davis? Everybody goes to medical school from Davis. So I understand the thought process, but the numbers, this is the way that it gets laid out. Okay. Just some housekeeping. We've been going, as I'm prone to do, talking forever. But after housekeeping, I'll open the door up for any questions. And I think everybody's asked what they've wanted to, but I'll hang around for a bit to answer anything else. Okay, but anyways, um, the national signing day to come back again. We would want two schools nailed down for students by June 1. This allows us to set the calendar for the rest of the year. Um, it will allow us to move smoothly from the Common App and UC essays into the supplemental essays. It's just if you all have older sibs, you've seen the brutalness they have to go through just dealing with the essays, and it's just lousy. We just want to get out in front of everything as early as we possibly can. I still owe a couple of people college lists, but everybody else kind of has them. So we'll discuss them. We'll go over the schools. You want to have do your own thinking and come up with your own criteria. And then bounce ideas off of me. And I always have I got an opinion on everything, so I can give you anything with that. But it's always good to have your own stuff you're thinking about. Um, Let me see. For the National Signing Day, the way that I'll do things is, we'll go back and forth with this over the night. We've got a couple of months over the next couple of months, kind of start nailing down some schools, get a little bit firmer on the preferences. And then I have them. This is what it looks like on the LCCDB on your college list, where it just says finalized on there. I'll follow up by email about a week before the first. I'll just say, like, look, this is what we've got. This is what we've got. We're moving on with these as applied to one of our 10 colleges. So just like saying, speak now or forever hold your peace. But it's by September 1. I want to have all their early action, early decision colleges finalized. That is also the date that Mission and Monte Vista's counselors, and a lot of the Cupertino and Homestead too, typically want the first the early decision, early action. Mission always wants it by like September 9th. On October 1, we'd like to get all the schools kind of finalized and nailed down. Just again, the speed allows everything to follow suit and to fall in place. A couple of other things coming up. The next presentations. Riley's going to have his essay presentations that he's doing. They're going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to the cleverness with which he addresses this. I'll be doing an essay presentation, in the next 2 weeks. That's always good. The essays are always interesting. It's the worst part of the process and the best part of the process. And we'll have a results presentation coming up. I'm doing it this late this year because there's only waitlist movement for UC usually after the dates that students kind of, the SIR date, the statement of intent to register date. With this year for UC is May 15th. It's usually May 1. So I'm doing a little bit later this year. But the results, as I said, very, very good. Last year was good with the privates. This year was good with the privates too. Like I said, 3 Northwestern, 2 Carnegie, 2 Wellesley, Cornell, 2 Rice. And the big surprise were the Cal and UCLA CS kids. Because last year we had like one kid, admitted to EECS at Berkeley, and she was also admitted to Princeton and MIT. So I was like, good Lord, what do you need these days? But this year it wasn't not awful. So some directly admitted to CS under LNS, some directly admitted to EECS. Yeah, good. And other Cal and UCLA results, not terrible. Maybe that's the result of the forthcoming demographic cliff. I don't know. UC's always cagey about the numbers until the UC Counselor Conference in September. But up until that time, I try and extrapolate, with the sample size that we have. Let me know questions. Like I said, I know that as always, I kind of overstay my welcome, with with the time. So now we're at an hour and a half. But let me know any questions if I'm happy to answer anything. And I hope you found this, somewhat helpful. The college list stuff is always just super rough. And determining it can be so much kind of fluidity. But yeah, let me see. Will you share the stats of the student that got into UCCS? Yeah, I'll do that with the results presentation. Like I said, I still have to gather all the numbers. But the you know the stats with UCCS, I'd say, I mean, now that I think about it, it's not going to be like, all the students were pretty good. It's not like we had some UC successes that of students that weren't perfect, but I don't know that it was in CS. Not that the students that were admitted to CS were perfect across the board, but the numbers were up there. That said, I now that I think I did have one EECS one that like for Berkeley had like Jesus 2 or 3 Bs. So yeah, I'll give you the numbers. Capped and uncapped UC GPA. UC is not looking at the SAT anymore, so that's not going to be a part of it. But yeah, but I'll share the numbers and I'll when we have everything collected for the results presentation. Yeah, let me know any other questions as you have them. It's 6 o'clock now, so if there's nothing else in anybody's minds, I'll kind of stop holding everybody hostage. I'll follow up with this also. Gabby will send out a recording of all of this. Um, uh, um, and you can feel free to revisit any of this with me. And if you have questions, let me finally say this, because you know I think that people can sometimes be disappointed to hear that there are as far as the evaluation of various fields of study. You can be it can be hard to differentiate between different schools. That's not always the case. There's some schools that are just notoriously good at one thing, and they're known for it. So if you have something regarding a field of study that you're particularly interested in, or one that I've talked about, like say psychology, but you really, really, really want to know schools that'll have like a major specifically in like neuropsychology or neuroscience, then that's something that I can give you some input on and do some research with. Um, However, if that would mean like eliminating 80% of the colleges on your list for the sake of the handful of schools that might have some random major, then it's probably not worth it. Take into consideration when you're thinking about the narrowness of the major, take into consideration the student too. And you always need reasons to eliminate schools, but in the case of some like real narrow type stuff, you can eliminate a lot of stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily want to just in order to get the total number of schools down. So the point is, if you've got a reason to really search out a very, very niche field of study that you want to, kind of limit the schools to or focus on, then great. But if it's just there to kind of as a blunt instrument to eliminate a group of schools, we might wind up with like 5 schools in the country, one of which might be like Pittsburgh State University in Kansas that offers the particular major. So, but please let me know. Um, Ooh, interesting one for the last minute, coming in as a dark horse with a good question. Interested in cognitive science. Would CS rankings correlate with this major? Does cog sci vary a lot across schools? Let me answer the last part of that first. Does cog sci vary a lot across schools? Yeah, it seems to. That's the weird thing. That cognitive science and neuroscience both are kind of all over the place depending on the school that they're at in terms of what the focus is. Cognitive science alternatively seems to focus on psychology, medical stuff, CS artificial intelligence. It's all over the place. Some schools will have a bunch of cognitive science classes or a program entirely under CS. Others will make it very, very soft. So in the case of cognitive science, that would be one where that's one where I have looked up individual schools that have had that. And there's some, there's you 26 people that are still hanging around. Thank you so much. As I prattle on. But in the case of CogSci, in the case of genetics, and there are a couple of others where it's kind of like they've got some there are like specific fields that are going to wind up, there are specific schools that are going to offer that, and you really do have to be kind of narrow on what you're looking for. Um, because not everybody's going to have it. User interface, user experience stuff. That's something else that you won't find that under every CS program. The cog science programs that you're mentioning are not going to all be the same. Genetics programs are not offered everywhere. So if you've got specific questions like that, then we can go over those. And the person that asked that, I'll make a note of that. And when we meet up, we'll go over those. Like I said, in some cases it's super CSy and real STEMmy. In other places, it seems to fall under kind of like med and health sciences, and other places it falls under psych. So yeah, good question. Like I said, coming in out of nowhere. Last question of the day, maybe. Very good one. Anything else? Boy, after that question, I don't know. But yeah, some majors are funky and weird. And I'll be happy to look them up. The user interface one has been, that's been popular lately, and there's more and more programs that are coming up with that. The newer programs typically they don't have the established kind of structure with where like data science. It can data science is now kind of getting more coherent and more standard as far as across schools what the curriculum is, but that wasn't always the case. And still today, even you'll find a lot of programs that are kind of like data science, but they're not quite that, like data theory, applied math and stats. Um, that's the thing is with cognitive science and user interface design, or user experience, is that they're all over the place right now in terms of the curricula and what they're trying to produce and where you can find them. You know, all different places. Some places in design, like user interface design. Some places under design. Some places under informatics. Some places under computer science. So there you go. Okay, so now people are probably hanging around thinking I'm going to say something important, which I'm almost certainly not. So I'm going to to save everybody from themselves. I'm going to stop this now. So thank you so much for your time.